Today's guest on the Winning Teams podcast is Jono Bacon, who originally hails from the UK, but is now residing in a much sunnier California. Now, Jono is an expert on the whole subject of communities. And in fact, we're very delighted to have him on board on the podcast today because he very recently won the Business Book of the Year 2020. And that is a huge achievement and a huge accolade, and congratulations to him. But Jono really does go into detail. He's an expert about communities. He explains what he means by communities. He explains the importance of communities to businesses, how to create and to build that community, and how to sustain it. And also the value to organizations of having a healthy communicate that become advocates and ambassadors for their business. But there are clearly, three key areas that he talks about in the book that you really got to get. And I'll let Jono explain that in the interview. But there are some real building blocks that need to be in place. And also you need to ensure that you've got the commitment to it and you've got the engagement of people at all levels within the organization. But there's real power in communities for the organizations that have the strong appetite and desire to do that. And it is also linked to strategic initiatives of the organization. So really encourage you to listen to Jono. It's fascinating. I also highly recommend his book. It's a fantastic book and it is well worth getting. And if you're looking at building a community, for heaven's sake, go and do that. But in the meantime, do listen to this interview with Jono. There are loads of other interviews with experts on the website that I would encourage you to go to. Is www.johnmurphyinternational.com. So go there. But in the meantime, sit back, listen, and enjoy listening to Jono Bacon. Jono, thank you so much indeed for joining us on the Winning Teams podcast. It's a real honor to have you here.
Thank you, John. It's great to be here. I appreciate having me on.
And it's an even greater honor. I just realized that before we came on because I saw that you have just recently, it's been announced that you won the 2020 Specialist Business Book Award in London. So congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I was really pleasantly surprised to see that. So I thank you to the Business Book Awards team and judges for that. So.
It's a fantastic achievement. I mean, it's, publishing a book must be a bit like standing in front of a crowd naked and then seeing what's going to happen.
It is a little bit.
Up, yeah.
Well, and it's one of those things whereby, you send it out to people. I sent the book out while I was writing it to probably about 15 people to get some input. And of course, they were very constructive in what they wanted changing. But generally, yeah, it's really good. But then it's when it gets on Amazon and Goodreads, that's when the real truth comes through. But so far, it's doing really well. So I'm very happy.
That's fantastic. Well, the title of the book, and we'll have it in the show notes as well, is People Powered. So and it's very relevant. I think it really is very relevant to be talking about the subject of communities in the midst of all that is going on in the world with the coronavirus, which is just extraordinary. But I think before we get into it, do you want to just define exactly what do you mean by community?
It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, it's a term that tends to be, everyone's got a different idea of what the word means in their heads. But fundamentally, when you boil it down to its basics, it's people who get together into groups to do something. And they're usually united by some kind of common view or interest or mission. I boil communities down into three types. And I kind of walk through this in People Powered. One is called consumer communities. These are people who get together because they have a shared interest, a common thing that brings them together. They could be music fans, film fans, fans of software, whatever it might be. And they usually just kind of get together to share the same interest and discuss it. The second is a type of community is called a champion community. And these people usually go the extra mile. They create videos, they create content, they provide support and guidance, they run events, things such as that. And then the third are called collaborator communities. And these are people who get together to build something, such as software or something other than that. And the core psychological components that make communities exciting and interesting to people flow through all three of those. But the tactics and the approach in which you build them differs a little bit between each of those three different types.
So when you're looking at it from a business perspective, and if you take it now
Mm,
for a lot of the audience, they're the senior executives, the senior directors, the CEOs of companies,
right.
why should they be fascinated by community?
I think one of the major reasons is that we're seeing this change in the relationship between companies and their audiences. So years ago, you go out and buy a product and you primarily engage with the company through their customer support phone line or if they had an email address. And then the internet created an era where companies could start marketing towards their customers and prospective customers. So people started sending out newsletters and other things. But especially in recent years, because we've seen a massive growth in people getting connected to the internet, massive growth in technology, and importantly, younger people such as millennials growing up in an environment where they're used to social technology, there's an implicit expectation that you don't just buy something from a company, you actually have a relationship with them, and that the company is invested in your success. So what's happening is that we've seen this increasing growth in interest and people building communities. I mean, Salesforce, Harley Davidson, Procter and Gamble, Random House. They've all built huge communities. Fitbit is a good example. They've got
Yeah.
1.8 million people in their community. And this is not people who are just asking questions about Fitbits. It's people who are discussing how to use them, how to swim better, how to run more efficiently, how to eat the right kind of food. So what communities do is they increase the quality of the relationship between the company and their audience, but also they enable the audience to talk to each other and provide support and guidance and run events and things such as that. So there's a really remarkable level of value that's generated. And especially for smaller companies who are trying to break into a market, the world is littered with examples where people have built a community and that community acts almost like an army that advocates for your brand, for your product that goes out there, and it helps you to break into established industries.
Okay. So, if I kind of a medium, small business and okay, yes, I want to build a community because this is a way of kind of leveraging and
Right.
getting, multiplying in the multiple factor. How do I go about creating the community? Because, it doesn't happen by accident.
Right, exactly. Well, the first thing you do is you go and buy people powered.
Very good. Yeah.
but seriously, I mean, actually, the what I did with people powered was broke the book into essentially, I think, what most founders, executives are looking for, which is, first of all, what is the value of a community, and understanding not just the value but also the risks. Like, this is not a silver bullet; it's not a panacea. It's going to require work, and it's going to require doing the work thoughtfully. But then the second piece is, how do you go about building out a consistent strategy that you can deliver and that's mapped to the resources that you have? And in a nutshell, the way I approach this is that you first of all define the value that you want your audience to receive. A lot of companies make the mistake of saying, well, what do we want to get out of a community?
Yeah.
We want brand recognition, we want content development. But what's going to make it interesting to your target audience members? And what kind of people do you want to attract? Do you want people to organize events? Do you want people to provide support? Do you want people to create technology? What is exciting about the community that you can build to them? Because if you build something that's designed for them, then you have the ability to pierce through the noise. Because right now there are infinite distractions with, especially right now with COVID. People are massively focused on other areas. But when this all settles down with COVID, people are distracted by family and work and hobbies and things like that. So the value proposition is critical. But then the next piece is you break it down into a set of very specific targeted goals for your audience. And this will encompass things such as setting up your infrastructure, making sure that there's a clear set of incentives that you provide for people, making sure that the onboarding experience is simple and effective. My recommendation is always start small and start simple with the value that you want to define. The key thing is that you get that value proposition correct. So, for example, the value for if you build in a community of let's say decision makers, executive decision makers, those people are going to want significant ROI out of your product, easy adoption into their company, and they're going to want to grow their business. Whereas the engineers who are going to be implementing your product, they will want technical support and guidance and technical material. These are two very different worlds. Engineers are likely to go to a forum. Your executives will never go to a forum. So the key thing, I think, is taking is defining the vision and then breaking it down into a pragmatic set of goals that you can easily start with and easily start delivering on.
And
And then what you do is you
could just
track
ask you
the
one thing
data.
in that. Sorry, John, just on
Yeah,
that. If you take that and you say, okay, it's a good example. So you're saying, okay, we want the CEOs, but we also want the engineers.
right.
Are you, how do you have both those in the same community, and how do you manage to actually satisfy both?
Exactly. Well, the way I approach this is I've developed something over the years that I call the community participation framework. And the basic gist of it is that when you define your different audiences, let's say for the sake of our example, we're going to focus on decision makers and the engineers implementing your product.
Right.
You're going to need two different community journeys, one for each of them, because they're very different audiences. And, in the same way that marketing people who are listening to this know that the most effective way of sending material to people via email is to segment your audience, because they're getting material that's more relevant to them. So with this community participation framework, what you do is the first thing you do is define the on-ramp. So what is the value that you want, for example, the executive to get out of the first interaction with your community? And that could be understanding the ROI of your product, or being able to connect them into the rest of your customer base for networking and things such as that. But for the engineer, it could be, I want to get this thing up and running as quickly and as easily as possible. So you define your on-ramp first, but then what happens with all communities is that once someone's generated that first piece of value in the community, they've done something easily that's useful to them. They then go through three phases. They start out as casual members, where they don't really know anyone, they don't have those relationships, and there's probably a bit of imposter syndrome in there. Then they become regulars, where they know people, they feel part of something, they get a lot of value out of it. And then a very small number of people become core. And the core people, one or two people in every 100 who are incredibly passionate about what you're doing. The key thing is that you layer in incentives to keep people moving through that journey. So you have regular interaction with them, you give them regular pieces of value. It's a little bit, again, like in marketing circles, in the way that marketeers will do email nurture. You don't sell someone right out the gate. You nurture the relationship and build it. You do the same thing with communities. But the other thing that you do is that you apply the right level of focus for that phase of the journey. So, for example, when people are new and they're casual members, they haven't built a habit yet. And the way in which we get retention is that you get people participating in your community for at least 60 days. Now, the way in which you do that is you design that 60-day journey with the right combination of content and new value that you deliver them and engagement with them. And then gradually what will happen is that they'll become sticky in the community. Right. And then they become the regulars. Then you don't have to worry about losing them as much. You just have to keep them engaged and involved. So it's really about being intentional about mapping out that journey. Again, in the same way that product designers map out the product onboarding experience, marketeers map out the email nurture experience. We do the same thing with communities.
But if you take the one slight difference I see with that, okay, so I've got an email sequence to actually acquire the customer, right?
Right.
And in this case, actually getting somebody into the community is so much just the first step. How do I actually then keep that person there, and how do I sustain it? And right. I suppose, and there's another question in my head, is there any data in terms of what's the longevity of a community? I mean, does it go forever?
Yeah. That's a great question. I'll get to that second. So with the first piece, I tend to break it into, so, you've got that framework of you define your audience, you onboard them, and then you've got the casual, the regular, and the core, right? So that's kind of how you do the nurturing piece. So before that, you've got the growth piece. How do you pull people in? And that's usually a combination of multiple different types of content. So it's going to be blogging and email and articles and webinars, in the same way that you pull people into any product. Yeah. So what you do is when people come into your community and you provide them that first piece of value, the key then is that you want to get them through that casual, regular core phase. And it's a combination of different techniques that we tend to use. So I'll give you an example. With a client that I'm working with right now, the first piece of value is that they can ask a question and get an answer to their question. When they come into the community, then what we do is we're tracking how much they participate in the community forum. And we've got tools that we can use to do that. When they hit these different milestones in the forum, what we do is we'll then recognize them. So the first thing is going to be, we'll drop them a personal email and say, we really appreciate being a part of our community. Thanks for providing some help. That personal piece of validation in itself will help to keep people participating a little bit. Then when they hit the next milestone, we'll make a public recognition of them. This is when also things such as swag. So the incentives and the rewards is one piece. It's only one component of that. But then the second piece is having regular reasons why people show up. And one of the reasons why people show up to communities is because they can get news and updates about what's going on with your product or your service. But the other piece is things such as campaigns and initiatives. People run hackathons. They have online events and virtual summits. There are competitions. It's really an amalgamation. It's a multimedia approach to keeping people coming back. And what you do is you centralize that on essentially a central clubhouse where your community tend to spend time. And it can be a forum, it can be a Slack channel, it can be something else. In terms of the longevity, it varies tremendously. If you do this right and you nurture from, defining your audience through the onboarding and get through that casual phase, if you manage to nail that 60 days with someone, people will often be around communities somewhat relatively casually for years. I know people who've joined communities and they've been around for 10 plus years. Right. The key here, and this is the psychological component that flows through all of this, is you want to build a sense of belonging. The value is what they get out that helps them to solve problems. But what keeps people in communities is that personal touch. It's a sense that they're with a group that they know, that they're familiar with, that they respect. That's what makes it a safe, comfortable environment for them to come back to. And that's where the personal touch and the personal engagement is so critical.
And if you take the community, I mean, sorry, this is a question rather than statement, but I'm making the assumption that many of these communities are hosted on like Facebook groups and groups like that. Is that correct or is that incorrect?
It tends to vary because my view is it's really hard to get people to use new tools. So go where your community already exists. I've worked, for example, with contracting unions who work in construction, and most of those people tend to operate via email and fax. Bizarrely, it's very difficult to build
fax
with fax. Yeah,
really?
Yeah. A lot of people in construction. I know a lot of people in construction, especially in the US, actually don't use email very often. They primarily use phone calls and fax. But for example, executives are going to spend more time primarily in their inbox. So it really depends where your audience tends to live. I'm nervous about using social media platforms like Facebook and LinkedIn because they change and you're sitting in somebody else's garden.
That was kind of what was behind my question, because you're at risk that suddenly Facebook or LinkedIn can decide we're shutting you down.
Right, exactly. And what I tend to look at is what are the mechanics of how people engage. So if people, for example, are used to using Facebook or LinkedIn, then they're familiar with online discussion and collaboration. Then I would try to bring them over to a platform such as Discourse, which is an open source community platform, or you could use Chorus, or there's many of these. So I'd probably try to encourage them to come over there. But again, like if you're looking at an audience that has never really used forums as a means for online engagement, do not try to bring them into a forum. They're going to wrestle with the technology, and that's not going to leave a good community experience for them. The thing that I would encourage your listeners and your viewers to be very cautious of is Slack. A lot of people build communities in Slack, and the problem with Slack has various challenges that are facing it. But one of the challenges is that you don't get to reuse content. So if you have a conversation in Slack, it's very difficult to go and revisit that conversation. Whereas if you use a forum, if someone asks a question and someone provides an answer, that gets indexed on Google. So people can they can type into Google a question, then it brings them into your community. So that reuse of information is a really critical benefit. And also Slack just doesn't scale very well. Once you get beyond 200 or 300 people, it becomes very unwieldy and difficult if there's a lot of discussion.
So, I mean, just not harping on the tool, but if you were looking at a tool that you say, listen, if you want to build a substantial community, these are the sort of tools they're looking at, what would the ones be?
The one that I'm a big fan of that I tend to use with a lot of clients is called Discourse. It's a completely open source forum platform. And one of the reasons why I like it is because it's really well designed. It's simple to use, but it's also got tools that make it easy for you to, I talked about the casual, the regular, and the core, being able to look at all of your members and say, these are the most active members in terms of my community. Because what I like to do is, based upon what people are doing in the community, is you apply the right kind of opportunities, incentives, and rewards as people earn it. So, so if somebody's been around and they're helping people out, they're answering questions and they're generating content, you want to engage with those people. You want to plug those people in to mentor other people. You want to provide rewards for them. You want to recognize them publicly. So Discourse has got good tools for that. But there are platforms like Vanilla, there's Chorus, there's Lithium, there's loads of these tools
Yeah.
that are out there to do it.
And do they give you the data? Because at the end of the day, you need the data to see, rather than going back and say, okay, I saw Joe come in on Tuesday and Thursday and Friday, and you're trying to track
Right.
that. Do they have the tools that actually track that engagement?
They do. And one of the things that I always recommend to clients is that you want to pick a small set of data points and really understand what you're looking at. So I'll give you an example. Imagine you use one of these platforms. They all track page views, how many people are looking at your forum, and they all track signups. Now imagine your page views are steadily growing, and this is a public forum, so it's visible to everybody. You don't have to sign in to view it, which is what I would always recommend. The benefit of your page views growing is that tells me that your forum discussions are getting indexed on Google. People ask questions on Google. They don't go to README lists or anything like that. They type questions into Google. So that means that your inbound traffic is looking good because your page views are growing. But imagine that your signups are going down. People are not signing up and participating. That tells me that your value proposition for people to sign up is not strong enough. People are window shoppers, first of all, in communities. They go and browse, and then if they've got a reason to post, they'll sign up for your forum. So the key thing is pick 4 or 5 of these metrics and understand what you're looking at. You know, another one that I like is stickiness, which is the number of daily active users divided by the number of monthly active users. It gives you kind of a percentage of sorts. You want that to be about 30%, because what that tells me is even if you're growing your community, if you tend to stay at 20 or 30%, it means that, you know, people are finding consistent reason to come back to your community through that growth. So that's the most critical thing.
Did I hear you right in saying that you recommend that people got to sign up for it or not sign up for the forum? That it's
I would recommend that the way I would recommend for most communities is, especially around companies and products, is that the discussion that happens on your forum, for example, is all visible without someone having to sign in. So you can just go to the website and browse the discussions, because that gives you the benefit of getting all of that Google juice so people can consume the value of your community without ever having to sign up. What will then happen is if they keep coming back to your community, they keep seeing it and they keep seeing valuable discussions in there, they are more likely to sign up. In the same way that, again, going back to marketing and email marketing, you know, people never buy on the first couple of emails. They need to trust you and understand it first before they start buying.
It's the old know, like, and trust. It hasn't changed all that much over the years.
I know. Yeah.
Right. If you're looking at, you know, doing this, I mean, what are the big pitfalls? What are the mistakes that you see people kind of really make that screw it up?
Yeah. One of the mistakes is that there's one which is more general, and it's not just focused on communities, is that people spend a lot of time making plans and they don't execute. My view is you've got to have a good intentional plan about how you build your community, because if you kind of, you know, if you kind of wing it, you're not going to create that intentional experience. You're going to create a place where people show up and it's just not a very polished experience for them. It needs to feel like it's being well designed. And for that, you need to put together a plan. But once you put together the plan, you need to be intentional in reviewing it and making sure that it's on track and tracking the data and how it's being reviewed. So that is one piece. A lot of companies, they like the planning, but they don't necessarily stick with the execution. The second thing is that there's a trend out there where people go and hire a community manager and they say, that person, Sarah, she's responsible for building our community. And then everybody else in the company funnels their requests to the community or their engagement through Sarah. Don't do that, because people in your customers, your audience, they want to engage with your employees. They want to engage with you. So you need to be able to create an environment where your employees understand that your community is as fundamental to the success of your business as your product is. And that involves making sure that they feel comfortable in what they need to do with the community, how often they should show up, that they're not going to get fired if they make a couple of mistakes when they start out. It's that training piece is critical. Sarah, your community manager, she should be there to facilitate and engage and build growth and run the overall program. But you need to set an environment where your staff are engaging. You know, I worked with a company one time called HackerOne, who are one of the largest security companies. And the CEO, Martin Mikos, said, I want everyone in this company to engage with our community. I don't care whether you're sweeping the floor, whether you're selling something, whether you're running a department. our audience is what makes the lights stay on, and we need to give
Mm.
them the best possible experience.
And I mean, building a community, the concept, I love it. It's I see so many advantages, but I also see the risk that you're actually building this wonderful animal, but sometimes animals can turn on you.
They can, yeah.
So how do you
how do you
see that go wrong?
Yeah, and I think there are a few reasons why sometimes discontent can form in communities. One is that um, your audience experiences a level of uncertainty. So when people are uncertain, we're experiencing this right now with COVID-19. When we're experiencing uncertain times, people don't have access to the right kind of information. People jump to conclusions, or they tend to get paranoid. So
Mm.
one solution for this is have a regular stream of information and updates about what's going on with your company, with your business. Try to preempt your community's concerns. That's the first thing. The second thing I think is making sure that you've got an active level of engagement with your community and you keep the door open about criticism. One of the challenges with a lot of companies is that when they build their first community, they don't want any criticism to manifest on in their community. They don't
Yeah.
want people to say bad things. That is not the way to approach it. You want to create an environment where people can have constructively critical discussions about your product, about your services, because then they respect the fact that you're open to that feedback. And if they respect the fact that you're open to it, they're less likely to throw their toys out the pram and get upset that you're not listening. But the other element to this is setting very clear expectations around conduct. Have a code of conduct. Make it clear that we encourage critical discussion so long as it is respectful and it has dignity. Do not allow swearing and shouting and homophobia and all that kind of nasty stuff. Make sure that you have those rules in place and that you adhere to them as well.
Okay. And if companies decide, okay, this is something that we want to do, and and apart from buying the book, and apart from hiring you, Jono, to actually do it all for them, but I mean, what tends to happen in organizations where there's an initiative, they say, to go back to your point, they hire the proverbial Sarah, say, listen, okay, you be the community. Is that the way to do it, or is there a better way of doing it from an internal organizational perspective?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely need to have somebody in your business who owns the project. You need someone who's gonna go through the method that I talk about, like to define your audiences, to design your on-ramp, to put the right kind of incentives in place, to set up the infrastructure. So you need an internal owner or a stakeholder. Now that could be somebody on your existing team who does this as part of their role. The good news with communities is that they can kind of be as long as a piece of string. I've worked with some companies where they have part of a marketer's time, and some companies where they have 12 or 15 community managers. As a general rule, if you're serious about building a community, I would hire a dedicated role for it, a good community manager or a director. And when you hire that person, if they're in charge of running the project, make sure that they've got program management experience and chops. There are a lot of community managers out there who tend to focus a lot on blogging and social media and going to events and things like that. But you need program management experience if you're going to be asking that person to kick it off. But I think the key element here as well is that a community doesn't succeed in a business when it sits in a vacuum. One of the reasons why I always recommend, and I mentioned this in People Powered, is that you first of all build your higher level set of objectives, is that you need to get feedback from other team members. Communities are really fundamentally cross-functional. They require marketing and your product team and your engineering team and other people to be involved. So you need to make sure that those people feel like they've got their skin in the game, because if they don't, they'll just see this as, the CEO's idle spare time project that ultimately will die in 6 months. So you need to make sure that they've got a simple means in which they can feed into the process. And part of that is going to be expressing their concerns, like what is the relationship between sales and our community members? What is the relationship between the marketing team and the community team? All of those questions need to be figured out through that process. Otherwise, it won't succeed.
Yeah, because you do have this kind of a CEO's kind of latest fad, and we'll humor
Exactly.
him, and eventually he'll run out of steam, and we'll just
Yeah.
get back to normal. Anybody listening to this today, as we're in the midst of the pandemic that we're actually dealing with, say, okay, it's a great idea, but you know what? Not right now. I shouldn't be doing this right now.
Right.
You would argue differently. or
Well,
would
I
you?
think it depends. I think it depends on, I'm a realist, and I attempt to be a realist, and communities are not for everybody. I've seen very few situations where a community can't add value. If you can find an opportunity, let me put it this way: your audience, your customers, are a network of minds, and they've got experience, and they've got time, and they've got varying levels of passion. By gluing all of that together, you can generate enormous value for most businesses.
Mm.
The question is to what extent do you feel like this is something you want to harness right now, and to what degree? So there are many businesses that will say, I love the idea of this. I believe I could get enormous value out of this, but I just don't. We've got other priorities. And that to me is completely fine. I would say if you don't feel excited about it, don't do it, because you're going to need someone to be passionate about it to make it work. You're going to need somebody to say, this is something that could potentially really transform our business. We can get more value out of our customers. We can give them more value. We can build retention. We can increase the quality of the brand. We can tap into new markets. But you've got to have someone who's got that internal passion to do it. If it's kind of like, well, I heard this guy on a podcast, it sounds kind of interesting, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah. Okay. There's got to be you've got to connect it to a business objective.
Exactly. And the other thing as well is making sure that your business objectives and your community objectives are aligned. One of the things, when I mentioned earlier on about the community managers, one of the things I hear repeatedly from community managers is, I joined a company and it didn't really go very well because the execs didn't understand what I was doing. And
Yeah.
part of the problem with that is that the executive goals are not aligned with the community execution. So for example, if one of the goals is we want to build a partner program, then part of your community strategy should be building a partner community.
Yeah.
If one of your goals is going to be broader brand awareness, then you should be focusing extensively on community outreach, enable your community members to go out there and speak about your products and your services and support them. So they've got to be aligned.
Yeah, absolutely. John, it's a fantastic topic. And I mean, I know that it's a subject obviously you're passionate about. And I think your original passion was sparked by open source. Is that correct? Yeah, a few years ago.
Yeah.
And you kind of built on from that. And certainly the book People Powered sounds like an absolute must read for anybody who wants to really kind of have a look at this a bit further. Before we wrap up and we can share where people can get in touch with you, two questions I ask everybody: a book other than your own that's had a major impact upon you.
So the book is The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. I've become an increasing fan of this kind of borderline religion / psychology called Stoicism, which is how you manage with difficult times. The Obstacle of the Way, I think, is especially present right now because it basically says that in every difficult time, there is an opportunity buried in those obstacles. And it gets right to the epicenter of what makes communities and groups and group collaboration really powerful, is that it can seem like a lot of work. It can seem difficult, but there is so much opportunity buried in that. And I give this book out to people who are going through tough times. Friends of mine who've been through cancer and they've lost their jobs or their families have fallen apart. If you're having a rough time right now, definitely read The Obstacle is the Way. But if you're not, it provides a fresh view of the world. So
yeah, I actually have his book, The Daily Stoic.
Yeah.
And I love it because it's just a short bit every day, and it's great stuff.
Yeah,
so
and his email list as well, where he sends you a daily Stoic meditation. They call it. It's actually really good as well. Yeah.
Is it? Oh, I must sign up for that.
Well worth it.
Second one is daily rituals, if you have them, and what are they and what they do for you?
Yeah, I have a few. I mean, the first thing I try to do is I try to be organized in my brain about what's important and what's urgent in the Stephen Covey approach. So I have a list of things that are, what are the things I want to move the needle on right now, and what are the things I need to move the needle on in the near term. And I try to move the needle at least a little bit every day. So I have a couple of hours in my calendar every day, which is just for do something on those topics. And I've got to do at least something on each of those different topics. But that to me helps to kind of move the broader business forward, as well as dealing with short-term client issues and all the rest of it. The other thing for me is I as best as I can, I protect my evenings. I'm sure you've experienced this as well, John, that, run your own business, it's easy to kind of eats away into your
Yeah,
evenings.
it can be.
And
Yeah.
for me, not just spending time with my family, but making music and just relaxing is really critical. So I really try to protect that time as well. So
You're a heavy metal man, isn't that correct?
that's true. Yeah.
Yes, you've got a few recordings under your belt. And also, I was going to say a gin lover, which might actually give the wrong impression, but you're a fan of gin. Is that correct?
I am a fan of gin. I collect gin. So we've got about 50 bottles in stock right now. And I
Have you?
track them on
Yeah.
a map on my website. So
Yeah, I saw
yeah.
that. There's a good friend of mine is a produces gin in Ireland, gunpowder gin, Pat
Oh,
Rigney. Yeah.
I have a bottle of gunpowder. Yeah,
Have
it's
you?
it's in the light blue bottle, I think it
Yes,
is.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Pat
great
Rigney.
gin.
Yeah, he's a good friend of mine. He's a great guy.
Oh
Great
wow.
guy.
Yeah, well
Yeah.
tell him that his gin is amazing from some random guy in California.
He'll be delighted to hear that. Actually, he's a pure marketer at heart. I can tell you.
Well, his gin is he's a great distiller as well. So
Absolutely, Jono. Thank you so much. Where can people reach out to you? We'll put everything in the show notes, but where can they get in touch with you?
yeah, probably the best place is my website, which is jonobacon.com, Jono, bacon like the meat, .com. And because I have a sufficiently ridiculous name, I tend to be the same on all the social media networks as well. But yeah, that's probably the best place to start.
Okay. Jono, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. Congratulations on the book again, but it's been a fantastic opportunity for our listeners to hear your story.
Wonderful. Thank you, John.